Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&As. So let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. I do conjugate upper lower. You think it's a good idea to add some light good mornings to respark muscle growth and enhance recovery on upper body day, and some face pulls on lower body day to prevent injuries? I don't know about the good mornings there, because let me be frank with you. When we talk about resparking muscle protein synthesis, something I've discussed in the past, the more I look at it, I'm going to have to agree with a lot of the literature out there that it's not really a real thing. In other words, if your total training volumes and loads are appropriate and you're training hard enough, you're probably not going to see any additional growth by training something more than about twice a week. The difference being maybe when we're dealing with something that has a little more volume left when we want to push the limits. In other words, I might have lifters with a weak upper back do rowing 4 days a week sometimes, only because I can get more total training load, better muscle activation, everything by doing those 4 days a week. But we're pushing hard sets. I'm doing them like having them do sets on all 4 days so that we can handle the heaviest loads possible for the rep range we're working with, without trying to stack 6 or 8 sets in one day and then compromising actual muscle fiber recruitment. Okay, but those are on very few exercises would we do something like that on. If you're just coming in and doing a lighter weight that's not hitting effective reps, you're not getting muscle growth out of it. It's just becoming active recovery at that point. Now, are you taking these sets to failure? Then they're work sets. And if you're not taking them to failure, they're just active recovery, really. And I'm not saying I don't have quite a few of my lifters even do some face pulls all 4 of their workouts, because a lot of them do. But you need that context to understand that. It's not going to give you significant amounts of muscle growth to do what you're talking about. And so here's what I would say. Are you putting in enough work on your main days or not? In other words, if you're pushing your squatting, deadlifting, good mornings, and everything as hard as possible twice a week, if you're really pushing those things correctly, I don't think you're going to see any muscle growth benefits at all from some light good mornings. Now, for someone who has some low back cramping sometimes and fatigue, who doesn't have access to a reverse hyper, could doing some banded good mornings on their off days help? Sure. But we're talking about restoration, active recovery type stuff at that point. It's not part of your main training. So no, you're not really going to benefit, because it sounds like you're trying to think that, well, if I just get some extra really light work in on these extra days, it'll help me grow more of doing upper stuff on my lower and lower stuff on my upper. And it's just simply not going to be the case. It's probably not going to do anything, right? It's probably not going to do anything at all. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but it may not help you either. Probably won't. All right, next question. Would you recommend that a novice program the power clean into your novice 2.0 if they're a field athlete, soccer specifically? If so, how? That could be an option. A lot of times I'll say don't change these programs, but the 2.0 is such a bare bones template that some sport specific needs could absolutely be worked in without it being a recovery problem. Yeah, you could work power cleans in all 3 days if you're a field athlete. The thing to think about though is, and I want you to think about this seriously, do you know how to perform a power clean? Do you have someone to teach you how to correctly perform a power clean? Okay, because that's something important. If we're going to talk about it in this context, it's kind of important that you do them correctly. Okay. Otherwise, you might just want to do some hang cleans and high pulls and stuff like that don't have the same skill component. But could that be added? Certainly. Here's the other thing I would say. You're not going to run this program long, right? What do I say most of you guys out there need to do? Most of you need to be on some type of conjugate pretty quick. I put novice lifters on conjugate. I want to make that very, very clear with my own clients. Specifically, someone who plays any sort of field sport or contact sport. And I do have guys who do those things. I put them on conjugate as soon as they are physically ready to do conjugate. Okay? And do I have them do speed work? Yes, they do plyos, they do jump work. Okay, so they do plyometrics. Have them do hang pulls, have them do cleans if they're able. Snatch grip high pulls. We do all these sort of things. I have those lifters do that stuff, and the best thing you could possibly do is get through a novice program as quickly as you can and get over into a conjugate style training where you can do dynamic work against bands. Like if you're really serious about improving your ability in your sport like that, making sure that you have adequate facilities to do speed work with bands and things would be a very, very good idea. And even chains. Accommodating resistance for any sort of athlete who needs speed is beneficial. And there is research on this stuff. This is not just my opinion. There is actually research on rate of force production with bands and chains. This has been studied. Like, these things do work. So you need to be thinking in those terms instead of just something like the 2.0. And so again, you could, like I said, you could run the 2.0 and that's fine, and throw some power cleans in all 3 days, for something like 3 sets of 3, 4 sets of 3. All right? Certainly doable. But keeping in mind, you need to be looking at when can I get over to get to something that's a little better for overall for athletes like conjugate is. Okay, because you're just building a quick base to get through some of your new gains real quick with a program like that. All right, and we have to understand that in that context. All right, next question and last question of the week. Is there a progression method that we can apply to conditioning in a way that it doesn't hinder our lifts, at least in the long run? Is it as simple as adding an extra 20 seconds high intensity round, or doing an extra day of moderate intensity work, or adding more variety of conditioning? Hill sprints for 5x10s twice per week, and then 6x10s the next week, twice per week. Okay, we need to be very, very clear. Conditioning work, just like anything else, has thresholds on how much of it's going to be useful. In other words, we know that doing 20 sets of back squats a week in every study we've looked at doesn't produce more muscle growth in your legs than, say, 10 sets a week. Okay? When we get over to a lot of the conditioning work, make sure that you're trying to actually train for conditioning, not for endurance. They're two different things. With our conditioning work, you could slowly add, and the thing is, could it literally be adding one extra set of something like that per week for a short period of time? Sure, up until you get to the threshold of where you want it. Then what you need to keep in mind with conditioning work is that we're not looking at can we add more and more time to conditioning work. Okay? Conditioning is supposed to be short bursts, and it's supposed to improve work capacity. It's not endurance. You're going to get to a threshold of where you need to make it harder. So with hill sprints, I don't know. I don't do hill sprints. You might need to start loading yourself up heavier. You might need to find a steeper hill. Might need to put on a backpack or a vest that lets you add a little bit of weight. You need to add more work to your sled drag. If you're doing barbell complexes, you might need to add more weight to the barbell. In other words, up at a certain threshold, increasing volume of conditioning work is not improving our conditioning. We have to then add resistance inside the context of the given volume that we're doing. Otherwise, we're just getting more and more towards endurance, and you might as well just start doing some list cardio if you want endurance. And that's fine, and list cardio has its place. But again, you're talking about conditioning. As long as you add it slowly, usually conditioning won't interfere as long as everything is on point. What do I mean? Sleep, food, everything else. In other words, here's a mistake guys make. They do a bunch of conditioning when they're trying to cut up a little bit of body weight. Well, that's stupid. That's not going to work. That's literally like saying, well, because weightlifting burns calories, I'm just going to do more total volume when in a calorie deficit to burn fat. No, you're gonna bury yourself. Okay, you're gonna bury yourself. Usually we reduce volume slightly when we're cutting. If you're smart, a good coach has you do that. Same thing with your conditioning work. If you're cutting, you need to be doing less conditioning work than whatever you've been doing. You sure as hell don't add it in. So if you're bulking, that's a good time to start adding. If you're slowly bulking right now, and most of you guys need to be gaining weight, that's a good time to start upping your conditioning work. Why? Because you have the recovery resources to deal with it. You have the training fuel to recover and to train because you're eating more. That's a good time to add in extra conditioning work. So put that in perspective too. It's a problem if you can't recover from it. Well, your ability to recover from it is going to hinge on not only your total workloads and volumes and everything you're doing, it's also going to depend upon your rest, your recovery, your food. Okay? So if you're going to try to add more and more conditioning work, probably best reserved for when you're in a calorie surplus and you're sleeping 8+ hours a night. Be my advice. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.